hello, and we're back again. So, I was recently watching a couple of clips over on YouTube. Actually, it ended up being about three, but I'll explain. And the first one was from Seder, and he was addressing the point in which he was talking on, what's the use of interviewing these people that are just spreading misinformation, and how, it's easier to kind of make the claims, but then it's harder to fact check every single time or every single claim that's done on air, simply because of the fact that when you do make the claims, you don't have that time to just look it up and make that counter argument. And instead, you do really have to kind of think on your feet. And no matter how much you prepare yourself, there's going to still be a certain amount of things that the other person will say and that you can't expect. And the result is that the people on one side will argue, oh, they made a point, see, they couldn't answer. And while the other side will say, well, it doesn't make sense, but also let me fact check this instant, and that is really a problem. Now, in the other clip, it was from David Pakman. He does independent journalism similar to Sam Seder. And one of the things that he also noticed, and this is where the third clip comes in because it's from a recent Bill Maher interview with Sean Spicer. And if you're not aware of who Sean Spicer is, he used to be he used to be the press secretary. I believe that's the name of the position during the Trump administration, until he was replaced by his wife. He kind of left and his wife got in his place, and then of course McEnany was replaced them both. However, the reason why I'm talking about this is that they do make an excellent point in which, like I said before, it's easier to make the claims, but you can't fact check in that instant because you're on air and you can't always kind of anticipate what the other person is going to say. And so this really brings up the point on, how information literate or internet illiterate can somebody be. More specific, if we talk about in the context, with the vaccines, the treatments, the information that we have on the virus, face masks, when we're talking about this current context in this current times, we do have to talk about health literacy. And that's not something that everybody mentions that much. It's actually not talked about at all. And to kind of begin talking about this, we do have to give a definition for health literacy. Now, I will preface this by saying it's not something that is static. There's no set definition. It's nothing that's set in stone. Instead, you do have to look at how it is being currently defined, because it does change over time. And it's not just health literacy. I mean, if you look at literacy in general, then you'll see, what I mean by all this. But anyway, let's just hold on a minute, and why don't you have a seat? Come on, have a seat. All right, enjoy the view. And in the meantime, when we have to define health literacy, just to kind of paraphrase and not just read it off word by word, we're talking about the capability that somebody has, not the intelligence, not the not like the actual competency. Like, we're not talking about if you have a degree in science or something. No, we're just about what is your capability, the capability that every single person has. It could be an existent one. It can be that potential to be able to handle the information, read the information, process it, understand it. But furthermore, how for the person to actually communicate that information, how to ask questions, how do they react with that information, and can they actually grow more knowledge from that base point. Now, in one of the other And one of the earlier definitions, well, it's not that early, but in one of the definitions that was used in the past, they do use the word basic health knowledge. Now, what is basic? Are you talking about head, shoulders, knees, and toes? Or are we talking about, do you know how there's the micro circulation, the one that goes from the heart to the lungs, or the macro circulation that goes from the heart to the rest of the body? Or are we talking about, do you know X amount of groups of medications? Do you know what are the side effects? Do you know physiology, anatomy? So this is where we get into a tough situation where if you say basic health information, what does that mean? And so one of the newest recommendations that is currently being used, they throw away that that section of basic health information. They throw it out the window, and now we're focused on on the person themselves. What is their capability to deal with the information and do something with it? Now, before we continue on with health literacy, it would help if we actually look at the context, because I say context and I'm talking about health literacy, but why is this important? Well, if we go back to, and I don't know when it was published, I would have to look it up, but you might have heard of him. He's kind of this famous dude that does podcasts. His name is Joe Rogan. Now, one of the things that you have to look at is that Joe Rogan had an interview with a doctor from MSNBC. He is frequently called as an expert on certain topics. And in that interview, Joe Rogan does something that's incredibly dangerous. But I mean, it's nothing new. I mean, he has done this before. But there's something that he does that's so incredibly dangerous about how he conducts the interview, because instead of being an interviewer who is trying to get to the bottom of facts and the truth, he starts spouting a lot of nonsense. And I'm not saying nonsense to call him, dumb or anything, but really he starts spouting about, oh, ivermectin cows, and you're misrepresenting me, and this and that, and oh well, what about the Selenko protocol? What about this? And he starts just throwing out statement and claim after claim after claim, and there is no basis for them. It's just talking points that if you go to any right wing Republican leaning media source, it could be like Fox News, or it can be like the Shapiros, or it can be like any other uh, media channel or any other independent channel that leans towards the right. They'll address all of these talking points, and he has spouted one after the other, after the other, after the other. And the doctor, obviously, he doesn't know, how to answer to all of them. And there comes a point where he tries to kind of fact check him in real time, saying, wait, let's address this one point. And Joe Rogan doesn't let go. He just continues on and on and on. For the layback person, the person who doesn't know anything about medicine or public health, they look at Joe Rogan. If they already had that inclination, they're going to say, hey, the doctor didn't know what to say. This looks bad. See, we won. That's why we're right. And that's so dangerous. It's so very dangerous. Why? Because instead of getting to the facts, instead of informing, you're just continuing on that perpetual misinformation. You're continuing to cement what that person believes in, which might be wrong. I mean, for example, the ivermectin. It's just not what, and I think well, not that I think, I did address it in a previous video, where ivermectin is for malaria, is for parasites, not viruses. And it doesn't really do anything. And any research is very much either funded by a pharmaceutical company, which is for obvious reasons. I'm not saying that as something nefarious, but pharmaceutical companies usually will fund research so that they can develop the drug and whatnot. But also, you have the fact that when you look at the facts, when it has been studied, and I'm talking about, on viruses and everything. It's not the same type of virus, but also when there is an effect, what has been studied is ivermectin on the white blood cells, not on the not on the epithelial cells, not on the actual cells of the lungs and the respiratory system, but on the white blood cells, which is like the whole different system. So it's very misleading, that type of reference to research. Now, having said that, because I'm kind of going off topic, the thing about this is Joe Rogan kind of hits on this one point. Not that he made it consciously, but he does hit on the point where he's spouting enough claims. The doctor looks bad because he can't answer every single claim. There's this even one research that he references saying, "Ha, you didn't read about that." When you go to court, just to make an analogy, in a courtroom, when you're going to have a trial, the prosecution and the defense, whatever information they have, whatever witnesses, whatever facts, whatever information they have, has to be shared, one with the other, and they have to also share it to the court, to the judge, so that they can be on an equal playing field and they can start, making their arguments based on the facts that they have at hand. Now, when you have a debate or when you have an interview like with the Joe Rogan or Bill Mayer, what happens? You don't have that equal playing field, because again, we go to the same place. You have one side who's just going to be spouting claim after claim. There's no backing up, but also the other side doesn't know what the other is going to say. And so if you want to fact check, which unfortunately, if you're trying to defend the standpoint of science, or if you're trying to disprove all these lunatic conspiracy theories, it's not possible. It's not. It really isn't. So in a courtroom, when you have a trial, both parties have the same information. One has to share with the other, and then they present their arguments based on those facts. When you have this type of interview, you don't. And so what happens? There's a perpetual misinformation. Now, if to continue on with the topic of health literacy, we have to address that literacy is at its core the ability to read and write. Like, that has also changed. Back in the Civil War, literacy was to the point where, okay, what's the distinction between you being able to actually sign your name versus, oh, you only put an X where they tell you to sign? Or anywhere from the 1850s to the 1930s, there was a survey that was made mainly towards white men. And so it was claimed that, okay, the public is illiterate. And you can see the problem in this. Like, that's just one subsection of the population. So much so that in the 70s, what they deemed to be like a very low count, in 1870, they said, okay, it was 20% of illiterates. In 1979, once they had a wider population and a wider sample size, oh, it's actually 0.6% that are truly illiterate. In the 20th century, with World War I and whatnot, there was the functional literacy, where they would say, well, if you have 3 or more years of schooling, you're functional and literate. Why? Because you were supposed to be taught how to read and write. It doesn't guarantee the quality or what level, but at least the basics according to that time. You also have in the 1950s, they would say, you know what, it's not 3 or more years, you have to be at a 6th grade level. In the 1970s, that's when they said, you know what, no, because there's an increasing demand on skill, you have to at least have a high school level in order to be functional literate. Now, going back to health literacy, as you can tell, the definition changes, and it changes over time. It's not just one particular definition for all time. It's not. So if we go back to health literacy, well, again, health literacy is the degree in which the person has the capability to process the information, read it, think it over, understand it, and then communicate that information, either to kind of transmit the information or to ask more questions and kind of build up knowledge based on that base point of where they are. Well, the thing is, it's not the 1970s, it's not the 1950s, it's not the 1800s. It is a very difficult standpoint to really be health literate when you have social media. According to the Pew Research that was released this year in 2021, they deemed that in 2005, on average, about 5% of the population was using social media in general, for general affairs. In 2011, it was about 50% of the population, and this year, 2021, it's 72% of the population uses social media. Again, in general. What was also found is that the social media platforms that were the most used was YouTube at 82%, and Facebook, or I should say Meta, is 69%. Now, why do I mention this? For the simple fact that social media has a great impact. Research that has been done on health literacy has been mainly focused on providing health care. For example, how physicians have to approach the patients to explain to them, you have this condition, you need this type of care, you need to stick to your treatment, this is what you need to do, this is what you need to avoid. Unfortunately, physicians are not that proficient at that still, but it has been changing. Now, if we go back a little bit, with social media, as you can tell, 72% is on social media. That means that the most available information will be spread through social media. The YouTubes, the Facebook, Metas, their branches like WhatsApp, like the Instagram, like the Snapchats. There's more branches through which information can travel. That's not necessarily a good thing. It's also not a bad thing. But here's the thing. What is readily available is not always the actual information or the right information. This is how misinformation spreads. That's why, a lot of what has been found about QAnon and, the anti-vaxxers and all that has been majorly found on Facebook. Also YouTube, but, in general, they mostly use Facebook, and that's how they spread the information. This is why it's important to kind of really approach this from a different angle. Not just, we'll just fact check and people will see that they're wrong. No. The thing is, if you know something about the definition, health literacy has nothing to do with you or the person who is given the information. It's about the person receiving it. Not everybody is the same. Not everybody has the same level of education. Not everybody has the same capability to understand information, to process it, to ask the right questions. Not everybody is on an equal playing field. Even when you're debating, the experts have their own facts, and you can't just expect the other to know, because if the one expert on one side doesn't know what the other one does, they look bad. They look like they're ignorant, like they don't know anything. They lose credibility. And that's when everything falls down. That's when the walls fall down. That's where each person on each side will pick and choose what fits their beliefs and say, ha, I'm right, or ha, see, that's why they're wrong. Kind of to further cement this point, there was a study done in Africa, and what they found in relation to HIV and treatments is that many times when the doctors, the health clinics were providing information on what's the management, like what's the healthcare that they need, as in medications, follow-up visits, lab tests, everything, because these type of treatment plans don't fit into the people's lives. If that treatment plan didn't consider the actual patient, then they were most likely not going to be following that treatment. However, if the treatment plan considered that that patient has a family, that they need to care of some people, that they need to work, that they have certain obligations that they can't just drop behind in order to go to a doctor's visit, for example, then those were more successful for that very same reason, because it takes into consideration the person who needs to receive the information. This is why instead of focusing on, oh, it doesn't matter, we shouldn't be debating, or there shouldn't be any debates because they're lost causes, or this is just a waste of time. Instead of looking at and through that view, from that viewpoint, we should instead be asking ourselves, how can we spread the good information, the actual truth? How we can spread the facts? How can we spread that type of information? How can we make it more readily available? If you look at, similar to the previous video, I'm going to provide links on the bottom, the DOIs, which that of course is kind of the link to the actual articles. And if, because I believe that a couple might take you to websites that you have to pay for the article, you can just look up the title of the article on Google and you'll get an article on another website and you can actually read it. But similar to last time, with an hour max of research, I didn't take the time, so I can't really say for sure, but it might have been less. But I have provided those links so that you can look it up, because again, don't trust what I'm saying. If it makes sense for you and you want to look up the information, you should look up at the information that I provide, just so that you see where I'm coming from. But if you notice, these are articles. These are not usually websites where people will go to and read. This is not something that is readily available to everybody. Because in order to get to this, you have to know what question to ask, what words to put, what keywords to put on Google to find an article about that. And as I mentioned before, when you're doing research, you have to look at it from a non-biased standpoint. You can't just look for, oh, vaccines are bad or vaccines are good, because you'll find articles and enough stuff, just to give it a term, a lot of stuff that are going to support either argument. Which one is right, which one is wrong? That's really hard to say. And so even for me, don't take my word for it. Look at the links, read the information for yourself, and make your own opinion. But again, if you notice, these are not websites that these are not websites or articles that you would think of and see in anywhere. You have to actually be looking for them. So what's more readily available? As I went over, social media. What would happen if we have healthcare providers engage in social media? What happens if we have the NIH, not as an institution, but individuals working for the NIH, spreading information? Similar to how you have like the Tucker Carlsons that have their Twitters or their Twitter handles. Or what about, the MSNBC correspondents, the Trevor Noahs, the Bill Mayers, they have their own Twitter handles and they tweet, or they're on Facebook, Meta, and they spread their information. They spread their message. What if we had that type of thing? Instead, have the research assistants, and that's easily done. Have the research assistants, send like a sentence or two on something that they were working on, or on that article that they published, and send it out into the unknown. Let that information flow. We need different information outlets, and we need to change the way that we spread medical and health information, because that is not only limited, it's filled with fraud and scams by people who might sound convincing, and the people who don't know any better don't necessarily have the time or don't necessarily know how to look it up or where to even start, where to begin. Well, that's food for thought. That's something for you to think. And I'll say it again. You know, take care. Be kind to those around you, because you never know what they are going through. All right. Talk to you later, and happy Halloween.